Hi, everybody. How are you? And happy full moon. I hope everybody's doing okay. I would have to say, this has been probably the most troubling week so far. The last 10 days have been very, very disturbing. And I know that it's impacting everybody out there. I presume most of you, maybe not in other countries so much, although I understand even in other countries, people are impacted by what they're seeing on the television or, on YouTube or something about what's happening in the US. So, in addition to a full blown pandemic, we have some I don't want to say we've had some very disturbing incidents with brutal killings that were clearly murders, but I am glad about the public outcry because I feel it's, time. It's time to have such an outcry, and it's interesting that it's taking place now. It's very interesting that it's taking place now. And it makes me wonder, what's necessary for global change, for real change, or even local change? What does it take to really shake people up? And maybe it takes a pandemic and certain conditions, economic conditions, global conditions, and then maybe you get some changes that are needed. So I'm not upset about the outcry at all. I believe the outcry is necessary in terms of the police killings of, innocent people who, innocent or just not deserving of death. I especially think of the young man who was simply jogging through a neighborhood in the middle of the day, going for a jog. This young guy with his life in front of him. A young woman who was on her way to being a nurse and was just sleeping inside her apartment, had done nothing wrong, and was brutally killed by the police, by a whole team of police. It's just, and these aren't isolated incidents. This goes on and on and on. And so the outcry is necessary. So I'm not upset about that, but about the fact that it continues even with the outcry, that there's brutality in the police force. I don't think all police are brutal killers, but there's a type of power that they have that some people with power abuse. And people are people. They're going to be all types. So there are going to be some, police with a heart of gold who would never kill unnecessarily, and do not. There are many African American Black cops who, they're not profiling their own people. So police aren't one body. It's a variety of people and types of people, but there's clearly something wrong. There's clearly something wrong that needs to change. So I'm addressing it because we have to talk about it now in an astrological forecast. We don't have to go on and on about it, but I do believe it's very important for everyone to talk about it and keep it very public and very much a topic of conversation. We can't afford to be tired of talking about it, or I just can't attitude about this. These are the kind of things that are very, very important. The attitude of I just can't, or I'm tired of talking about this is really weak-minded and immature. And so we have to muster the energy to talk about these things. So even here in astrological reading, I want to bring it up. And it is a part of the astrology. We have, if everybody wondered if anybody had any questions about what Pluto is up to with Saturn, with Jupiter, with Neptune, with Uranus, because they're all interplaying, they're all working together. So if anybody wondered what is going on with those, well, here you have it. Pluto seeks deep, deep, deep change, and it will seem slow until it doesn't. So for a good example of this, Well, you've got two really glaring examples in the public view. Now, in your own life, let me turn this off so we don't get pinged. In your own life, they're going to be the same thing. Like suddenly the change that's needed will become very obvious wherever you have Pluto and Jupiter and Saturn. These areas are the areas for you to be working on right now. So you have to know where they hit your chart. So just as a refresher, they hit your chart in the area, the end degrees of Capricorn and the early degree of Aquarius. That's where the threesome is. That's where you've got Pluto and Jupiter and Saturn. You have Neptune in Pisces in its home sign. And then you have Uranus relatively newly in Taurus. And so 2 earth signs, 1 water sign. I'm looking at the chart over here. I've got 2 multiples going right now. So if I'm looking over here, I'm not ignoring you. I'm just looking at the chart. So if you wondered, what will 2020 bring? I'm only laughing because, I had a friend who said she was just scrolling on Facebook one day, just, taking a break. And you know how Facebook will show you, like, here's a memory from whatever date. And sometimes it's a year ago today, but sometimes they'll just like kind of randomly show you a photo. And she scrolled past one where she was at a New Year's Eve party for 2020 and just putting herself back in that mindset at that time. She just burst out laughing, not because she thinks everything's funny that's happening, but because it's so unlike anything that we've expected, right? So anyway, that's the impact these planets can have. These are the outer planets. And they're speaking loudly and they're in tight alignment with one another. They're working very tightly with one another. And then we have the moon coming through the nodes. Like it's just, it's a very synchronized symphony of intent here. And we're feeling it. So, on a global scale, there's not, we can only do so much as individuals. I know my daughter was just here this morning and we were talking about how, we're donating money right and left and that we have to kind of pay attention and maybe even keep track of what we're spending and on what, because there's this desire to help. So there are many ways to help. Some people are out marching and protesting. Some people are donating money. Some people are posting and just keeping the conversation going and standing up for what they believe. And all these things are valuable. Also, I would say that a big value comes from, especially during these times, and I mean this, I literally mean this is valuable for all of us, is if you get enough rest. So getting a good quality of rest and taking really, really good care of yourself is more radical and revolutionary than you think. So, and I mean in a holistic way. I mean, not just going to the gym. Because a lot of, there's sort of this Americanized or popularized way of thinking of caring for your body, which is, I eat a mostly vegetarian diet. I actually do. And I, everybody's got like their thing about eating. Like I'm a vegetarian, I'm a vegan, I'm a pescatarian, I'm a this, I'm a that. Everybody's got this identity around their eating and they think that's caring for their body and for their well-being. But what I'm talking about is a little deeper. And for those of you who are in the GLOW program or to coach with me, you know what I'm talking about, that we talk about, kind of your spiritual wellness. And we talk a lot about rest and how are you listening to your body? How are you listening to your inner child or your inner anything? Are you even connecting with yourself so that you know what your body needs and what your mind needs and what your spirit needs? These are times when we really need to know these things. And you can't know these things if you're exhausted all the time, if you're staying up too late watching scary news or just binging Netflix. And I have nothing against those things. I do it too. Sometimes I just, need to watch scary news for a while because there's something magnetic and addictive about it. And that's something to notice, how addictive our modern creations are. They're designed to make you addicted so that you keep watching, and their sponsors will make money because you're glued to wherever you're glued. And maybe not so much with Netflix, but with Netflix, they obviously want you to be addicted to them, so you keep paying them. And I'm a fan. I watch Netflix. I'm not saying Netflix is evil or that the news is evil or anything's evil, but you need to notice how addictive the constructs around you are. It's a really important time, and my daughter and I had a long, lengthy conversation. We don't necessarily see eye to eye, but we had a lengthy conversation this morning about sitting 6 feet apart. We had a lengthy conversation about the cultural construct, and we both agree that there is one. Now, as to what the cultural construct is doing and the importance of it and how we react to it, we don't see exactly. We see somewhat eye to eye, not exactly. So I'm not expecting you guys to, see it exactly the way I see it, but there is a cultural construct, and increasingly it's becoming really obvious that we have a cultural construct and that we are being almost programmed by it. Well, not all, it's hard to say almost because it's obvious that we are, people who, even back in the 70s when I had my first advertising class in high school, they were talking about how advertisers, when they create marketing campaigns, are manipulating you on purpose, and this is not new, and it's not, revolutionary to think this, but we're like the fish swimming in the water, or the frog in the slowly boiling water. We're so accustomed to it that we really don't see it for what it is. And why am I talking about this? Because this is the astrology would say that power structures, and that includes our culture, is created by power. People in power create, and or people who are trying to get power, maybe economically or for whatever reason. Usually it has to do with money, but just some people just want power. But the powers that be, and they're not just one big power, but they're all over the place, different corporations, different parts of the government, different media outlets. Everybody wants power or money or both. And as individuals, we need to understand, and it's just, I am talking about the astrology. I'm just telling it to you in like common terms, that how it translates into what's happening. We don't need, I don't think, unless, if you want a personal astrology lesson with me, you can maybe pay me for that. But, it's very inherent in the chart that this is, and I've noticed, I don't watch a ton of astrologers, but the people I pay attention to, everyone sees that it's something like this. We all talk about it, maybe in our own unique way, but everyone's talking about the power structures and what they're doing. With Pluto, you always have things going on behind the scenes that are sometimes unseemly. So power brokers, power structures, people in power, or corporations in power, are often doing things behind the scenes, and we put a lot of blind trust into their intentions. And plus, as individuals, just to live our daily lives, we can't think about that all the time. It's just not practical. So you have to kind of turn on a little bit of white noise and just ignore it sometimes, just to live your life, unless you just want to sit around feeling stressed all the time. And I'm not recommending that either, but it is important to understand what we're living in right now. We're living in kind of this false construct of a culture and messaging. And we get very persuaded by that to live a certain way, make certain decisions. And this is just a time when we need to understand that. And it's interesting, this pandemic has slowed people down and disrupted things enough that we can see things differently. We're not, like, the cultural construct kind of broke down because it wasn't designed to take a pandemic, clearly. Like, nobody, even though doctors and the science community has been talking about it for a long time, capitalism and the wheels that turn that are like, that doesn't speak to our mission. And so the cultural construct wasn't designed to withstand a pandemic. And so in this situation of a pandemic, a lot of the social cultural construct that is like this little glass house that we live in, or a house of cards, but it can be broken. And once it breaks, or shatters, it really crumbles and shatters, and you see a different kind of reality, and that's what's happening. So, and sometimes when that happens, if you haven't been thinking of things like this before, that there's this other reality, or that we're being programmed a little bit, if not a lot, by messaging from it's incoming from all sides. It's all the ads you see, it's magazines, it's newspapers, it's videos, it's movies. Like, the messaging is constant, and we're plugged in everywhere. Like, devices have been created so that we're not just plugged in from, it used to be when I was growing up, maybe like my parents maybe would just watch the evening news, and then maybe I would be able to watch a show after dinner or something. So, the people who wanted to make money or get certain messages out only had us for little bits at time. And then it's grown and grown and grown and grown. And now we're plugged in constantly. So the ability to message us and kind of control our thinking, and I don't mean this in a conspiracy way, but this is not new stuff. This is not a surprise. There have been classes. I mean, surely some of you have taken the same classes where they talk about, again, I was learning this back in the 70s. Other students were learning this back in the 60s about the power of advertising and how it's designed to manipulate us, and stories about journalism and the news and even movies and television. Like, it's all designed by somebody with certain filters, maybe with certain goals. But now, because we're so plugged in, it's important to understand that what we're plugged into is not totally neutral or benign necessarily. I'm not saying it's all evil either, but it's not necessarily neutral. It's not necessarily benign, and it's not necessarily without an intention or a message that wants something. Maybe it just wants more of your money. Maybe it just wants to keep you gaming, or keep you watching Netflix, or keep you buying, a certain way. But it's important to understand that we are somewhat controlled unless we decide we aren't. And that is a part of what's happening here. But we've got this disruption that was not intended by the culture, by the powers that be. They didn't design the disruption. The disruption came. And so it's shaken us out of our routine enough that we can start to see things differently. And I think that's why the riots are happening. Because it's been in the news before that people have been killed, Black people have been killed senselessly, wrongly. And people get for a day or two upset. And maybe there's a trial at some point, and most of the policemen get off without any penalty, except maybe they had to go to trial. But now it's different. We're shaken up enough out of our routine, out of the normal, construct, that change can happen. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking about that. But I want you to understand it, because this applies to you too. So it's important to understand that in your personal life, the same thing is happening. So wherever this is hitting, and I would look mostly to Pluto, Jupiter, Saturn. Now, we could also look at, if you want to get more complex about it, you can also look at Neptune, you can look at Uranus and see where those, presumably 3 or 4, it depends on how your chart's oriented. It might incorporate more houses because of how it's situated. But probably 4-ish houses, 3 to 4 houses are, and they're kind of all on one side, chart's kind of leaning to one side. and our lives kind of leaning to one side, we're focused and notice like you're focused on two things more than other things. So I would say most of you are have two things that are very much a focus right now, at least, and maybe three. And these would be strong. These aren't just like little, like I need to do the go get groceries and, I don't know, pull the furniture in from outside because it's going to rain. It's not little stuff like that. It's big stuff that has needed to happen for a while. There are three big changes of evolution that you've been undergoing where you're in your own place there. There's a place in the continuum of that journey where you are. And let's say this is the beginning where Pluto caught you at the beginning of the Pluto cycle. And then there's, end of the Pluto cycle hasn't happened yet, but it's getting near, Pluto's more toward the end over here, like kind of where my shoulder is. All right. So this was the beginning. This is the ultimate end. Pluto's kind of near the end. If we can just use my shoulder and hands is the kind of timeline. And, now it's got Saturn that's coming in and going to come back across, emphasizing this area near the end of Pluto. And what that means in your own life is back in 2009, you were at a certain place in your life. And wherever Pluto was hitting, it was, emphasizing that area. And again, it may have fallen across two houses, depends on how your chart is. But you'll know if you look at 2009 what was happening, right? And then you've been working, most of you. Pluto compels us to do the work. If we're really sick and maybe not getting appropriate or adequate mental health care, or our situation is so survival oriented, sometimes we can't do. We feel so pulled off center by that we aren't doing the full work, and then it hits us even harder. So that's a case of when people are already down, it can sometimes seem like life kicks them around even more and they just can't get a break. But you can. It can just seem like that, but you can actually. So if you're feeling like one of those people where I just can't catch my breath or catch a break, don't go into victim mentality because you actually do have the power, but I certainly understand how it feels to feel like I just can't catch a break here. But I'm also here to hold you accountable, myself accountable, in these same areas where Pluto and Saturn are, where Uranus is, where Neptune is, where we also are responsible for doing the work. So, for example, in the universal chart, which is what I'm looking at, Pluto is up in the 10th house. In Capricorn is in the 10th house in the universal chart. And it's near the end. Jupiter's also there because they were just conjunct. They're both retrograde at the moment. And as is Saturn. And Saturn is newly in Aquarius, but there's still like this little raft of planets up there. And so they're hovering on this doorway between the 10th and 11th houses. And so all of us are impacted by the universal chart, by the way. So this does speak to all of us. So this is about the need for planning, the need for solid, grounded, forward-thinking, realistic, practical planning. Based on knowledge, based on knowing. So you can see, just to give you, again, something we can all understand, you can see with the pandemic, the knowledge has been there. The advisories, the proposals for plans to deal with a pandemic, all the stuff that's like the scientific community and the medical community, they've all, and public health people, others have been saying, hey, there's this thing that's probably going to happen within, we don't know, it could happen this year or next year, but it's going to happen. We know it's not if, it's when. And we can see that, and I actually remember 2009, that was when one of the coronavirus types was hitting, because I was actually helping a friend start a medical clinic. And I was helping organize the pandemic response at that time in 2009. So that is when Pluto first entered Capricorn. And isn't it interesting that here, as it hovers at the end, we're dealing with a huge pandemic, way bigger than that one. I don't even remember, was that bird flu, avian flu? I have no idea, but I remember I was helping organize. People had to come into the office and wear masks. So it was 2009. It was when Pluto entered Capricorn. And you would think, having had to go through that, we would have planned and had things in place better than we did or do to manage this better so that it wouldn't shut everything down. So that's the kind of message from Pluto. Like, if you don't plan, all hell's going to break loose. Like, things are really going to crumble and fall apart if you don't do the work, if you don't pay attention to the warning signs. And you can even look at that 2009 little baby pandemic, and I don't mean to dismiss, if somebody died in that, I'm not dismissing that, but compared to this one, that was a baby pandemic, and just in terms of magnitude. And if you look at that, it was almost like a little gift. Like, here's a little precursor of what's going to happen. And here's where you can see the universe really trying to help us. Like, here, this won't be as bad as it will get, but this is here to show you how to manage and what you can do and how you can prepare. And how many people did that? Well, there are certain societies, like South Korea, did plan, and they're doing much better. They're dealing better with this. I don't know if Germany had a plan, but Germany's dealing better with this. They certainly had a very quick way to deal with this in a way that makes it less impactful in terms of deaths. And so, there were a few societies that did decide to plan, that did decide to make decisions around what to do and implement some systems and make it more normal in their society to wear masks and to do certain things. So anyway, in your life where Pluto is hitting, it has really wanted you to have, it gave you some warning signs in 2009. It gave you some indication of where you can improve what you do, how you react to things, how you forget or don't forget, how you use information. Have you learned some of the things you were learning in 2009, 2010? How have you evolved since then? And so where we're feeling the pain right now in our lives, and the pain feels like a low boil pressure. It's not a sharp pain. It's not a sudden pain. It's more like a pressure that keeps intensifying until you just can't not do something about it. But the thing here is, you want to do the right thing. Saturn came in to say, learn, pay attention, learn from your mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes, but learn from them and use that information. Don't fail the final. You can fail a few pop quizzes, don't fail the final. So where in your life do you have, and it may be several things going on that have that ring of that sort of outline, that storyline in your life. And it's not too late, because Pluto's in retrograde. These planets are in retrograde, and it's gentle. The way all this works, it's actually very gentle. It's not. It's saying, okay, let's go back. Let's go back to this place, this thing that still is hard for you, that maybe you still need to do some work on. Maybe you did some work and then you stopped, and then you did more work and then you stopped. So, maybe you're not as far along as you would have liked. Maybe you're still feeling like you could have done better, and it's saying, okay, let's go back, let's work on it. And this is kind of like the racism thing, like you could have done better, go back, let's work on it. But in your own life here, for you personally, there's one specific area, and it can fan out to maybe 2 or 3. I wouldn't go much further than that. But I would say there's one really like clear, like I know, like the inner dialogue would be like, I know enough information to have done better over the last few years. And I see where, you'll see where you can tweak your plan or reaction or the way you're doing something. It could be in business, setting up a business. It could be in your health, like could be with your kids, parenting. It could be in romance and love, how you, let me give, all right. So if in 2009, your marriage or long-term relationship really started to tank, something around 2009, 2010, somewhere in there, things started to really go sideways. Then, and that doesn't mean like the final thing, like if your marriage started to go sideways in 2009, 2010, it doesn't mean it ended then, although for some of you, you'll be like, that's exactly when my relationship ended, or that's exactly when I got into a relationship. So sometimes, but that is the time when Pluto came in to teach you something and to help you get through some life lessons and to get you to a more mature, evolved place. So with a relationship now, let's say it was a relationship that went sideways or haywire or just tanked and ended, then you've had 10 years-ish, and you've maybe been working on yourself, hopefully, processing what happened to you and learning to do better. So, and you may have gotten in and out of some short-term relationships, or maybe you jumped right into a second long-term relationship. But regardless of how you reacted, either by, serial dating, maybe staying out of relationships with Pluto and then Saturn coming in, maybe you just took a break. Like, I can't, that was so bad, I just can't. But you've hopefully been doing the work, getting stronger, integrating what happened to you. And now I would offer that if you're somebody where it was a relationship issue, Pluto and Jupiter and Saturn really want you to be in a healthy relationship. That's the intention if it was hitting your relationship zone in 2009 and 10. If it was hitting your health zone in 2009 or 10, and it still would be sort of in that area, it would have over the last 10 years wanted you to be learning about working on transforming your health and your daily schedule, how you approached your schedule and well-being. This is a very broad, far-reaching area of the chart, if it's your 6th house, where it's talking about your mental health, all your daily routines. This includes your work life and how it serves you or not. Like, are you a workaholic? Is that sustainable? It's probably, the answer is probably no. So if it isn't sustainable and you're addicted to working, what can you do? Pluto's going to be making it abundantly clear right now that you just can't sustain whatever it is, if that's your issue, workaholism. Or if you're addicted to alcohol or addicted to sugar or addicted to being late. Sometimes people with scheduling issues, if it hits your 6th house this way, maybe it literally can happen if somebody's so bad about organizing themselves, struggle, and I don't want to use the word bad, but struggle so much to organize themselves. It can tear apart your life. It can tear apart your relationships with everybody, including your kids. It can tear apart your job experiences, and it can tear apart your friendships if you're always late for events. So it seems like you're standing people up. It can be a really bad addiction to being late. That can harm you and others around you. So any addiction is harmful. So I'm just saying that I'm giving you examples so you can kind of get a feel for what it might be for you. I've been talking about the 10th house, the 7th house of relationships, and the 6th house of health, but there are many other houses. What did I do? 3. So there are 9 other houses here. So what you want to be thinking about your own life is, if you don't know where these hit your chart, then just think about, what is it that I've really been working on or avoiding or struggling with over the last 10 years. And now that we're in this final stage of this transit with Pluto, and it's very intense, what do I know? Like, if I were coaching you, I would be asking you, like, what's the answer to the question, the thing I most need to work on is? Like, that's almost a life or death thing. And again, that doesn't mean it's your health, but it means it's the life and death of your life. Like, my life's happiness really depends, like, the thing I most need to fix if I'm going to be happy in my life right now is this. And it needs to be not like don't be flippant about it. A lot of us are in weird situations due to the pandemic. So don't be flippant and talk about something like, I just need to be able to get out of my house, or I just need to be able to get a haircut. It's not that. I mean, these are deep-seated issues that you've been dealing with for 10 years. So given 10 years timeline, that you would need to be thinking about, what I most need to work on and really fix is. So is it understanding how to be in relationship, or even put yourself out there and be vulnerable for a relationship? Is it fixing your career so that it's serving you rather than hurting you? Is it, repairing relationships with children, or having children, or, something to do with children? Is it some financial issues, maybe some spending addiction, or avoidance of dealing with financial issues? Maybe it's avoiding your spiritual connection. And that can be very painful. And a lot of times when we're spiritually sick, it just feels like a whole bunch of yucky feelings. And people don't understand that that's what it is. They're spiritually sick. So, if this is all hitting your 12th house or thereabouts, then it's more about, maybe you've been resistant to really doing some deeper spiritual exploration, study, practices that keep you in connection with whatever is out there. But that's a very important part of our well-being. It's a big part. It's actually, one could argue it's the biggest part of us, the most important part of us. And so when that's suffering, we really suffer. And it can feel like this anonymous, nameless disease that we have, where we feel tired, lethargic, disinterested. It can mimic depression. It can mimic a lot of mental health illnesses, but it's not really that. Like, if we fix the underlying problem, the mental health symptoms would go away. And I'm not saying all mental health issues are related to this. I'm just saying it can mimic mental health symptoms. So mental illness symptoms, I should say. Because it's like disinterest in things you used to love, just not having any energy, behaving kind of as though you're depressed, maybe not going out and being with people as much, isolating is the word for that, and, not being able to kind of get out of your head. And that's because you're not living in your spirit. And so some of you may have been suffering that, especially if you're Aquarian in any way. And some of you may not know that you're a rising Aquarius or a moon Aquarius. You may just be thinking about your sun sign, but I think a lot of Aquarians have been suffering that spiritual sickness, and that's particularly nasty. And It's nasty and insidious because it's hard to label. You don't know what it is. It just feels like, what's wrong with me? What's wrong? And not really knowing, what it is, how to name it. So anyway, that is what has been going on. I wanted to talk about the full moon, but I just sort of jumped into the other because of the big, big experiences we're having collectively. Just to talk about the full moon, luckily for us, and in a good way, although it is squaring, and I talked about this in the June forecast, it is squaring Mars and Neptune. And this is how you see Neptune once again getting pulled in, although Neptune and Mars are in harmony with Pluto and Jupiter and Saturn. So it's only the full moon that's creating the square. And universally speaking, the full moon, and you can think about what you want your next 6 weeks to be, what you want the next 6 months to be with this full moon. Its influence will roll out kind of in those lengths of time, like six days, 6 weeks, 6 months, and sometimes 6 years, and even beyond. It depends on the magnitude on your chart. Like if it's really hitting on one of your planets from birth or an angle in your chart, it may be a little bit more than that. But you could say at least it has a 6 day, 6 week impact, I would say, the minimum. And because it's an eclipse, yes, even maybe a little more. So maybe it'd be more like a 6-month impact. And so universally speaking, it really is about language, perception. It's really about learning big lessons, bringing things to light that were hidden. And this is because when this full moon creates squares to the 12th house where Neptune and Mars are, this is everything hidden. This is stuff that behind the scenes. And you have Mars with Neptune. Neptune obscures, and Mars can be violence. It's not always violence. Neptune's not always obscuring, but in this case, you can see it in the news cycle with obscured violence coming to light with this full moon. And you can even see how, interestingly enough, this full moon eclipse, rolled backward, but it had more to do. I'd say all the stuff that leading up to the full moon was really more about Pluto and Jupiter and Saturn being in a positive relationship to Neptune and Mars. And that's what I was saying at the very beginning, that a lot of what's happening now, including your personal story, is actually good. And you have to try to find where, like, another question I would be asking you, like, one was, the thing I need to work on most is, and then the next question would be for you to answer is, the big silver lining in all of this for me is, and again, not to give a sarcastic or flippant answer, but to really think about, in terms of what you've struggled with for 10 years, what is the silver lining here? Or maybe just 8 years you've struggled with something. If we just look at Neptune, it could be even just for 8 years, the thing I've struggled with, there's a silver lining around this thing I struggled with right now, because fill in the blank, and then focus on that positive and use that. The times were meant to be, it's always something o'clock, and it's always the right time, and we're always exactly where we are supposed to be. And so if that's true, you're supposed to be seeing the silver lining, seeing the opportunity to work on something, to go back and get it right. Just the way we are with racism, and admitting racism, and dealing with police brutality, and dealing with, the reality of pandemics, which will continue to happen in our world. It won't always be COVID-19, but it will be something else eventually. So, in your personal life, you really want to look under this full moon of, I see under the light of this full moon an opportunity to work on something that I've hidden from myself or I haven't allowed myself to see. And maybe it's a self-worth issue, how you do harm to yourself if Mars is doing harm to you. How have you been harming yourself? It depends on where Pisces hits your chart. Look at where Pisces hits your chart. That's where you may have been doing some harm to yourself cyclically, maybe not constantly, but cyclically you may have a tendency to do some harm to yourself with certain behavior patterns that are like habits or tendencies. And you want to look at how now you're able to see it under this full moon. And it doesn't have to be on the exact time of the full moon. I always try to emphasize this to people. It's not, sometimes powerful things do happen on the exact time, and it is something o'clock. But these are things, perceptions and realities that come in well before a full moon and, trickle out well beyond. So especially because if, a full moon's linking to other planets that work more slowly, there's some kind of cycle going on here, and you're in a moment right now as I record this and maybe as you listen to identify the thing you've been doing in the Pisces area of your chart to harm yourself that you could try to correct. Now that you see it, you can learn to do better, right? Sometimes you just don't know enough to, maybe you don't see it fully enough or admit it fully. There's this idea of admitting, racism, admitting police brutality, but in your personal chart, admitting something that's been hard for you to admit that you do. And it may not be, it's not like it's criminal, but it's something you do to harm yourself. So if, and let's give some examples. So if this were in your 6th house with Mars here, I might offer to the person, do you over exercise? Do you overdo it often to the point of hurting yourself? Do you are you over anxious to the point, like, do you overthink things to the point of hurting yourself? Do you exercise to the point of damage? If it's in your 8th house of money, I would say, are you overspending? Do you have some kind of spending habits and behaviors that end up hurting an otherwise healthy money picture? Or are you super hard on yourself for spending? Do you over conserve and penny pinch to the point of harming yourself? You could go either way with it. So there's something you've been doing, and so it's looking for the silver lining. And the silver lining sometimes is just seeing where you can fix things, because before you were just avoiding looking at it, and then you can't fix it if you're avoiding looking at it. But if you can see it, it's maybe painful to see it, and you're like, whatever it is you've done, but you can fix it. That's the thing. If you can see it fully and honestly, you can fix it. And that's the silver lining. That's the opportunity here. And with more gusto, there's more power and heft behind it because of everything this is all linking to. You've got the power of the solar system and the universe around you. So if you can see something and learn your lessons, you can really fix some things. And we as societies can really fix some things if we learn, if we don't avoid it. So there's a lot of positivity here. It's just that sometimes when we have to admit that something's gone wrong, there's that initial sting, which may be varying degrees of painful. But then once you see it and you admit it, then you can fix it. And that's always better. Always better to endure that sting and then fix it. So that's a long one today because we've had so much going on. I really wanted to connect with you guys. I hope everybody's doing all right. Bye.